Thank you, Senator Wyden. And Dr. Shambaugh, the state and local funds that were eventually adopted in the American Recovery Plan Act, or ARPA, totaled $350 billion, even though many commentators criticized that amount as excessive. Indeed, many states reported budget surpluses over the last 2 years, with California reporting a $76 billion surplus in 2021 and a $98 billion surplus in 2022. And also in 2021, California received $26 billion in federal aid under ARPA. In light of these circumstances, were the critics of the ARPA plan correct in calling the $350 billion state aid package excessive?
Senator, it's not an issue I've spent a great deal of time looking at. So from the surface, what I would say is one of the challenges in crafting some sort of bill like that is always you don't know exactly what's coming down the pike. And so the recovery was more rapid, I think, than many people expected. And so in that sense, state budgets have recovered faster than I think many people were anticipating at the time it was passed.
Well, thank you. I actually think that that's accurate, and there are many of us who are saying maybe we should redirect those funds either back to the Treasury or something else, but I won't go into that with you. Did the $1.9 trillion of federal spending in ARPA that was unleashed through both state and local aid as well as through direct payments to individuals, did that contribute to our inflation over the past 2 years?
I think inflation is generally seen by most economists to be a function of supply and demand in the economy. To the extent that the Recovery Act led to, or the Rescue Act led to, faster economic growth than we would have had, fewer people unemployed, people with more money in their bank accounts, that will provide some more demand. I think most studies have said it's somewhat at the margin, not a massive impact, but that it probably left us with less unemployment than we would have had, and therefore a little more demand in the economy.
Well, just finally on this issue, California has a new, what I call a scheme to send residents an additional $17 billion in, quote, inflation relief, end quote, checks, which a Bloomberg columnist recently called economic illiteracy of the highest order that will increase. And I think what he was saying is that that's just going to fuel inflation. Would you agree that sending out a $17 billion worth of checks to people in order to help them deal with inflation is actually going to cause a greater inflationary impact?
I think the reality is, given the size of the economy, $17 billion probably would have a marginal impact. It probably wouldn't be all that substantial. I think any more money you spend, probably at the very small margin, could increase inflation. But I don't think $17 billion in the scope of the U.S. economy would probably be a substantial factor.
Well, would you at least agree that pumping spending into the economy at this point, when we have a demand issue with regard to inflation, is going to cause more demand and more inflation?
Yes, that's what I'm saying. I agree. At the margin, more demand is going to lead possibly to more inflation. I think things around that margin probably wouldn't be a huge impact. Okay,
thank you. And Dr. Haffajee, in 2014, I want to talk to you about the public health emergency surrounding COVID. In 2014, you and two of co-authors wrote that the spirit of emergency powers laws seems to enshrine three key criteria for suspending normal lawmaking processes. The situation is exigent, the anticipated or potential harm would be calamitous, and the harm cannot be avoided through ordinary procedures. That's what we saw with COVID. The lack of clear triggering thresholds for terminating emergency powers is particularly troubling. This is again from your article, creating the possibility that critical legal protections might be suspended indefinitely. So the question I have to you, which is one that's being asked by many, is, are we still in a public health emergency related to COVID-19?
Thank you for the question, Senator Crapo. During COVID-19, we have found that the public health emergency declaration by the Secretary has unleashed a number of authorities that have been very helpful to addressing the acute harms of the pandemic. and many of those flexibilities, there's exploration about should they be extended, for example, telehealth. So ultimately, the decision about whether to terminate the public health emergency rests with the Secretary. ASPE's role, and would continue to be, were I to be confirmed, is to inform that with data and evidence around what is the situation on the ground, what would need to happen, should this public health emergency be terminated. It is a complex issue because it involves agencies across HHS and partnership with the states, which is why the Secretary has said he would give 60 days notice before terminating.
Well, thank you for that analysis. Senator Wyden and I are working on the lessons to learn from some of these emergency actions that have been very helpful and maybe should become permanent. I think that should happen in regular order, though. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Crapo.